This afternoon session is about the development contributions. A quick reminder, if we want to talk about any specific sites, we'll have to move into PX. But if we have got some of these questions, we'll try and get them all together so we're not flipping in and out of PX up and down like a roller blind. So we need to just do it in a sensible fashion. So thank you very much and far away. Good to see you.
Right, so as you know, we went out for consultation on the draft development contribution policy at the end of February. Consultation ran through March, and then you heard from submitters alongside the annual plan in April. So this workshop is to go through the feedback that we received from submitters and to discuss some policy options. So you saw this slide this morning, but just to remind you, development contributions are a cost recovery tool for the growth component of infrastructure that has already been agreed to in the capital program. The draft policy uses the LTP 2024 capital program, which has growth capex of $923 million, up from $730 million in LTP 2021. Developers are not currently paying development contributions that reflect the council's actual cost to deliver this growth infrastructure, and this means that ratepayers are cross-subsidising growth infrastructure. So in terms of an agenda for today, the afternoon will be split into two sessions. The first part of the session will be the development contribution policy, and then we will discuss some DC rebate options with you following the briefing that we had with you on the 6th of May.
So consultation on the development contributions policy review started on the 25th of February and ran until the 26th of March, largely alongside the annual plan, so that we could mention the other consultation and all communications that went out to the community. Prior to this, staff met with the Hawesville Residents Association, Property Council, and it was discussed a few times at developers forums. Throughout the consultation, the Kōrero Mai page was viewed over 1,500 times. We posted a Newsline story that received over 460 views, was shared to Facebook. We emailed 420 identified stakeholders, including developers, residents associations. Consultation documents were available in all libraries and service centres, and we hosted a webinar that a whopping 10 people attended, but has had 112 views since. We received 44 submissions from 11 organisations, 18 businesses and 15 individuals. We asked whether submitters had paid development contributions or anticipated paying them in the next 3 years, as we thought this provided good context for elected members, knowing who they were hearing from. Here, 54% said that they had or will pay, and 45% said that they hadn't. However, it's worth noting that some of the 11 organisations who haven't paid DCs represent businesses that do. Overall, 10 submitters were supportive of the review, 9 somewhat, 12 did not support, and 13 either didn't know or didn't respond when asked. Submitters who have never paid DCs and don't anticipate doing so were nearly twice as likely to support the policy review. Specifically, 30% of these submitters expressed support compared to 16 of those who have paid. Alan will speak to the key themes heard through the consultation within the key policy issues.
Right, so in terms of how we're going to work through today, we're going to focus on the issues that submitters asked us to make changes to. You received a memo last week that provides the staff advice on this policy review, and attached to this memo was an A3 table that details the policy issues that we're going to work through today. So you can follow through. We'll be working in the same order that the table is in. So the legislation is quite prescriptive when it comes to setting development contributions. The LGA allows for the use of averaging by development types. And this means developments within a specific development type category will be assessed as having the same level of demand regardless of individual variations. And so there will be naturally winners and losers within each development type, and that's okay. The way we build averaging into the policy is with the use of a HUI, which is a household unit equivalent. A HUI is a unit of demand used in the policy to calculate the development contribution charges and also the development contribution requirement per development. A HUI represents the average demand a household places on council infrastructure, and it's assumed that each household places the same level of demand on the network. The policy assumes that each lot or each section contains one HUI. And then for non-residential developments, we assess them as a proportion of the HUI. So water supply, wastewater and transport are based on gross floor area that is then converted into a HUI. And then stormwater is based on impervious surface area. But ultimately, we want to make sure that any adjustments that we do outside of the averages are carefully considered. Because when council adjusts outside of the averages, you risk revenue leakages, which increases ratepayer subsidisation of growth development. The policy should really only look to adjust when actual demand is significantly different to assumed demand built into the policy. The threshold that our policy sets is either half or double assumed demand, and then it's assumed that everything else is just built into the averages. So in terms of the first issue we're going to look at, I'm going to look at the residential unit adjustments. So the council is currently adjusting development contribution charges for residential development with a gross floor area of less than 100 square metres. The reduction is in line with GFA, so an 80 square metre dwelling would be charged at 0.8 of a HUI, or 80% of the development contribution charge. But in the last 10 years, houses in Christchurch have been getting smaller. And in the last year or so, 45% of building consents were for homes less than 100 square metres, which means that you're providing a discount for almost half of all new homes, and that's not what this policy is intended to do. So we think a new approach is needed with respect to how we assess for residential units. The other issue we have with a GFA-based adjustment is that we don't actually have any data that correlates GFA of a dwelling with the number of people living in it. However, we do have census data that shows the greater the number of bedrooms in a property, the more people are likely living in it. And the more usual residents in a residential unit, the greater the level of demand on council infrastructure. And this is why we think a bedroom-based policy is a good option here. So the growth model that underpins this policy and the growth model that was used in LTP 2024 assumes the average household in Christchurch contains 2.6 average residents. And so looking at where that adjustment should occur, you're probably looking at 1 bedroom and then 7 and up. And then everything else is basically built into the averages. So in terms of our small unit adjustment, as I said, we're currently providing an adjustment for everything under 100 square metres. And we're proposing to move to a residential unit adjustment based on bedrooms, with a small unit adjustment for 1 bedroom homes only, to be assessed at 0.6 of a HUI, or 60% of the total DC charge. We have data that shows that 1 bedroom homes have an average of 1.38 people living in them, and this is about half of the average. In terms of submitters, we had 5 who supported the change, 8 were opposed, and then we had 3 who expressed mixed views. So in terms of those mixed views, we did receive some alternative suggestions. So we received a request for a small residential unit adjustment for 2 bedrooms. So 2023 census data shows that 2 bedroom homes in Christchurch have an average of 1.82 people living in them. And this does not meet this threshold for a special assessment provision. If this change were to be made, we would recommend you bring the large residential unit adjustment down as well, probably to around 4 or maybe 5 bedrooms, to reflect that you're adjusting within the averages built into the policy. This would increase the administrative complexity of the policy, and so we don't recommend it. We did also receive a request for a small unit adjustment to only apply to central city dwellings, but we don't have any data that supports having an adjustment just for central city properties, so we also don't recommend that either. So we thought the easiest thing to do would be to stop at each of these policy issues to get your feedback before we move on. So happy to take any questions.
Yep, Andre first, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, my feedback is that what you're recommending appears to be absolutely spot on. One of the most chronic shortages in the city is in one-bedroom places, and because they're often uneconomical to build, we know they have less people in them. So, absolutely on the right track, in my view.
Tyler?
In terms of the residential adjustments, were there submissions or feedback by the development community around how it may put them off with larger homes in the market? Could it change the amount of homes that get built?
We didn't hear that. We did hear from developers who like the GFA based adjustment, probably because it means it reduces their development contribution charge more than this policy would. But we didn't necessarily hear that making changes to the policy would reduce the number of homes they are producing. Ultimately, development contributions is a very small component of the overall cost to deliver a development.
That's good to know. And were there any potential snags within the policy that the submitters or the community raised?
Sorry, what was that?
Any fish hooks or anything like that they sort of really detested within the policy itself?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. No more? Yanni, please.
Do you know what percentage of those one-bedroom places are being used as Airbnb
So,
or short-term rental, or are just sitting there like ghost units?
I believe Monitoring and Research will be providing a briefing on the census data in the coming months, so that might be best wrapped up as part of that briefing, but I don't have that data to hand.
I just feel concerned that we would give an incentive for people to have more Airbnbs in the city with the small residential adjustment. So, yeah, but there's lots of one-bedroom development happening around the city. Right. So is that something you think we need more of, like from our housing point of view, like from our demographics?
So in terms of the policy, we would currently assess Airbnbs as residential units. So they would be caught up in this. I think it would probably be difficult to, unless they were consented as short stay accommodation, to assess them differently. And then you run into issues if the development type were to change in the future, then they would receive an additional assessment to reflect that changing development type. So in terms of the administrative efficiency of this policy, it's best to assess all residential units the same way and then deal with Airbnb issues outside of this policy.
Okay. Thanks.
Carry on, please.
Cool. So the next issue is the large residential unit adjustment. So we currently don't have one in our policy, but we have proposed one as part of this draft policy. The reason we've looked to do this is we've been getting an increased number of multiple tenancy houses with lock-up rooms that have an ensuite, a shared kitchen, and then like a shared lounge area, particularly around the university. And these are currently assessed as one household unit. And so the draft policy includes a large residential unit adjustment for 7-bedroom properties. And they're to be assessed at 1.4 Huey or an additional 0.4 over Huey. In terms of feedback that we received from submitters, 2 supported the change, 4 opposed it, and then 3 expressed mixed views. And then in terms of those mixed views, we had, I believe, one submitter who suggested that the adjustment should start lower. But if you, again, look at the averages that we're using to build this policy, between 2 and 6 bedrooms is essentially built into the averages. So we don't recommend that large residential unit adjustment start lower unless you were to introduce a 2-bedroom adjustment as well. We did also receive some feedback from some submitters as to whether the adjustment could be for 0.4 of a Huey per additional bedroom over 7. So 0.4 of a Huey is essentially one person. So council could potentially add 0.4 of a Huey per additional room. However, census data also doesn't support this. So if you look at the census data that we have for 7 bedrooms and 8 bedrooms, there's really not much difference between them in terms of average occupancy. So we don't recommend making this change either. And also just to note, with respect to the large residential unit adjustment, we are looking to be quite targeted here. There aren't that many properties of this size in the city.
Yeah, that was my question. How many is there? Not a lot, I would think.
Rare.
Yeah, okay. Okay, any questions on this part? Tyler? Yep.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wanting to get some clarity around the large residential unit adjustment. So this only includes residentials, not
Yep.
halls, right?
No. It's just something that is consented as a residential property. So it's just got one kitchen, but it's got more than 7 bedrooms. So it's a large house, basically.
Been to a few of those, yeah. Okay, thank you.
And this has nothing to do with an existing building, it's just a new one that comes
Just new
through our
ones.
system.
This policy only applies to new consents.
Thank you. Anyone else? Carry on, please.
All right, so the next issue we've looked at, and this is in 2 parts, are stormwater, the assessment for the stormwater activity. So the council currently provides 2 reductions for the stormwater activity, but both of these are out of alignment with the special assessment provisions that are built into the policy. So where demand is half or double what's built into the policy. So the draft proposes to bring both of these assessments back into line with that principle that's in the policy. So the first issue relates to when developers provide stormwater infrastructure as a condition of consent, and then that infrastructure reduces demand on council network. So the policy currently provides a reduction for all stormwater infrastructure, regardless of the level of mitigation. The draft policy has been amended so that the stormwater reductions are only provided when the resulting demand is reduced by more than half. And this would see relatively minor adjustments, such as the installation of rainwater tanks would cease, but this does not affect developers who provide a large degree of stormwater infrastructure, particularly for new subdivisions. They will still receive a discount for their on-site mitigation. In terms of feedback we received, we had 4 submitters who supported it, 6 were opposed, and then 2 expressed mixed views. The council will still undertake a special assessment if the development exerts a level of demand on council infrastructure that is significantly different to what is assumed in the policy. Staff follow a set methodology to determine the degree to which council's network has been mitigated by the stormwater infrastructure. We do also note that on occasion, developer-provided infrastructure is vested with the council, but the assessment sometimes receives a discount for less than 50% because of the degree of mitigation that is provided. But council may consider it fair to include a provision for these sites to still receive a stormwater reduction because the infrastructure is being vested with the council. And there's a suggested clause in red on the A3 table that you have to deal with that.
Very good. Who's up first? Andre?
Thank you.
No, this is interesting.
Yeah, I guess just my key concern with this one is if it's like a 10-story apartment building and each unit in the middle of town is paying the same amount towards stormwater.
That's the next issue, the multi-unit adjustment.
Yep.
That's the next issue.
Cool.
So this is just when developers provide stormwater infrastructure as a condition of consent.
I've jumped the gun.
Good work. Yeah, honey?
So I'm just wondering how we assess the effectiveness of what they're doing. I've had a number of intensive housing developments in my ward where when you go past, you see the water flows onto the road. And so the people can't, the footpath is flooded, basically. So I'm just like a little bit concerned that we've got appropriate safeguards to protect the community from the increased risk of flooding if we're going to let the developer do it rather than us do it ourselves.
That's a different
Might be our stormwater engineer down.
Yeah, get your question. Go.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Brian.
Morning or afternoon. I think the council has a strategy for managing stormwater both through its own infrastructure and also a provision of private infrastructure on site. So it's a mixture of those two things. And the council has standards in the Infrastructure Design Center and its stormwater management plans that are meant to achieve certain outcomes in the environment for both water quality and water quantity. So while some sites are generally small enough that the council network is able to accept stormwater without any mitigation, there's a certain size of site or a certain impervious surface coverage at which point the council would ask that if it didn't have a sort of local stormwater system prepared to deal with that they would mitigate on site with private stormwater.
So the question I have is, how are we auditing that what's been done is sufficient? Because, and also, how do we look at the cumulative impact of streets in my area where we're getting huge numbers of intensive housing being built, and each one might be doing their own thing, but cumulatively, it's got a negative impact.
So the council has a program of water quality and water quantity modeling citywide, and that is a general measure of cumulative effects. And then we set the requirements for on-site or for sort of subdivision-wide mitigation based on the needs of the environment. So I guess effectively, the council has a closed loop of modeling and updating its own requirements for mitigation.
So how do we audit what we think is going to mitigate, and then see, or what we think is going to be designed, then what the impact is after it's built? Like, is there a process to go back and ground truth
To make sure something's working correctly.
Yeah, like that it's not exacerbating the flooding.
So through both the building consent and resource consent process, there's auditing of installation of stormwater systems to ensure that they're designed and built properly. In addition to that, the council has its own internal auditing, whereby we'll go to older sites that are meant to be using on-site stormwater mitigation to make sure that they're keeping up with maintenance and so on.
Okay.
Brian, just generally though, in areas which, say, Yanni's talking about, just about in the long run, the stormwater may be held back through tanks before it goes out to the road, but in general, everything in an existing block will end up in the gutter anyway. It's only new subdivisions which have got their own stormwater treatment systems that can either hold it back or it drains to the ground and on their sites.
So on-site rainwater tanks have a limited benefit, and that's limited to a fairly narrow range of storm events. For the very long storm events that cause the flooding, like we saw a couple weeks ago, rain tanks are not really effective. The only way to mitigate for flooding in those types of events are very large stormwater storage areas. The council does have a program of flood mitigation over the next 10 years. Somewhere between $200 and $300 million set aside, and those will be large-scale flood mitigation projects.
And that's in existing areas, so to speak.
In existing developed areas, yeah.
So what stormwater projects have you got underway in the intensive areas of Limbod that have been built with multi-unit dwellings?
There are no large-scale flood mitigation projects yet, but there is a program that will be divided up into projects over the next 10 years.
Right, so if this goes ahead, we don't get the DCs from those units to fund it. We have to fund it from rates.
So every project has a growth component that is related to the anticipated growth for the city, which I think is 15% over.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So this is changing that, or?
No, this is just when developers provide this. This here is just about developers providing infrastructure.
Sorry, no, I understand that. But if their mitigation still isn't sufficient, like I presume this is a discount. So instead of paying the DCs to mitigate the stormwater issue, they get a discount because they've done something on their own site.
Only if they reduce demand by more than half. So we're getting rid of the reductions between 0 and 50%.
Yeah.
And then from 50% upwards, they'll still receive a reduction, but those ones are fairly
Small scale.
the reductions, yes.
Yeah.
But the developers that will still receive a reduction are providing fairly significant infrastructure that deals with stormwater.
So what Ellen's come up, it's improving the situation, what they're suggesting.
Only if what they're doing isn't contributing to more issues, right? And that's why I was asking about the audit and how we can have confidence that what we're thinking is going to work and mitigate is actually true.
And
When I asked for the data with the recent flooding, for example, we have very little. We tend to rely on people complaining in terms of a data point. We don't go and survey the areas that have flooded and work out what's actually happened. We don't look at the dense areas of huge intensification and go, what's happened to the stormwater, as far as I understand.
The Three Waters guys go out and drive around and make sure what they've designed or what they have in mind is working and see pinch points that if it needs rectifying, they're getting data all the time on different areas.
Okay, well, I look forward to getting that information because I've put a number of questions in to understand the consequence of this. But more and more people in my community are raising concern that when we're getting wet weather, they are seeing more flooding, more ponding, and I know it's not all. It's not going across the entire roadway, but it is actually, places like Limber where you've got schools, massive ponding now that prevents access.
Yeah, some of those issues are legacy issues related to network problems, and those are the kinds of things that the flood reduction program is meant to fix. And like you said, we don't want ratepayers subsidizing effects from new development, which is why all of those projects now have a growth component built into them.
Thank you, Brian. That's great. Thank you. Go, Ellen.
So the next issue is the stormwater reductions that we're currently providing for developments where there are at least 2 units on site that are attached to each other. So the current policy provides an actual demand assessment for stormwater. That means we don't use the Huey averages if a development contains at least 2 attached units. So this includes things like apartment buildings, but it also includes developments that had, say, 2 attached units and then the rest of the residential properties are detached. The entire site receives a discount. So what we're proposing is to stop providing these discounts if the special assessment threshold has not been met. So in terms of feedback, we had 2 who supported it, 5 were opposed, and then 3 expressed mixed views. So as part of the review of this policy, we have updated the base units for the Hueys. And so the ISA averages that are built into the policy now account for smaller residential units and changing development type patterns and increased intensification. So the average ISA per site or per parcel has reduced from 427 square metres to 367. And just to note, a special assessment threshold will still be triggered if the actual impervious surface area of a site is less than half of what's assumed in the policy. So that would cover things like apartment buildings where they are building up.
Tim, please.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of irrelevant whether they're going up or not. It's the water displacement on a site. So we're now getting a large section with one house that's being bowled, and we're getting 6 to 8 or whatever, whether they're 2 stories or 10 stories, kind of irrelevant. The issues kind of following on from my colleague, Councillor Henson. We are going to have more and more issues with stormwater as more of these are done and taking up more and more space on a site. So I would prefer to look at getting rid of any stormwater discount, because we are going to be facing some serious problems and it's just getting bigger. So that's my thought on this. What are the thoughts with regards to staff and recommendations?
We would still probably consider it fair to provide an ISA discount for apartment buildings because that total impervious surface area of the site is significantly different to what would be built into the policy. But we can, so that's what would be triggered by a special assessment. But otherwise,
So it's not being triggered so this amount of space on a site that can actually absorb water other than the stormwater design, as in pipes, etc. That's actually, I'm just kind of like, we're going to have a problem and we're trying to discount it for the developer, which affects the house price, etc. I realise, but I'm just kind of confused how we're trying to cover the cost of our future infrastructure, which is going to be growing. I know it's explained a wee bit, but it's going to get worse than better with the amount of development.
so
Alan, can I just throw if you've got a 100 square metre house on a section and you bowl it and you put 5 100 metres houses on top of each other, you've only still got 100 square metres of roof. That's where you're aiming at, isn't it?
if the section's only 100 square metres, so yeah, the policy is currently assuming that section has, 367 square metres of impervious surface area.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to fill the entire, if the site's only 500 square metres and you fill it with 5 houses, then you're looking at a significantly higher demand assessment for stormwater than is actually capable of being built on that site, and so that's why we're suggesting this reduction.
Yeah. Because a roof is a roof, no matter how many buildings are underneath it. If it's the same
Yes,
size,
But what we are
impervious
getting,
surface area is what dictates stormwater demand. We might need Brian potentially.
that's right. All right, Tim.
That's why we've used
what we are getting is say you've got a quarter acre section, one old house on it, gets bowled, and this is the golden circle which the developer's looking at. So they'll put 6 units on there with a driveway. So suddenly the area that can actually absorb water is hugely reduced.
So what we could do, if you wanted to, if you wanted to be stricter with your stormwater assessments, you could say you could treat the entire site as impervious. So if they had a 500 square metre site and they were intensifying it, you could give them an assessment for 500 square metres of impervious surface area. But I think you might potentially run into issues of assessing for demand that is greater than what's actually being provided on that site if you provide an assessment that is significantly higher than what's actually
Able to be
capable
built.
on the site. So we could do that if you wanted to sort of ensure that we were treating an entire site as impervious. I just would worry that we might run into issues with receiving an objection if we were to assess for demand that wasn't actually there.
What about the slow release tanks which are required in some areas? Are there discounts around those? So I know that in so it's not only Yarni's area that's getting flooded. So it's
I think so. From our view, the effect on the environment is directly proportional to the amount of impervious surface being added. But 5 units on a single lot is much more efficient in terms of providing 4 dwellings than would be 5 separate houses. So I think that's why they're discounted, because a single unit in a multi-unit actually has quite a small footprint compared to a single dwelling on a site, and that's the reason I think for the discount.
So a quarter acre with 1 house on it is creating more of a flooding problem than a developed site with 6 units on it in a driveway. No, but
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, a bit confused.
Yeah.
it's just Asher. Also, concentrating DPO 6 stories, you've got more space. No, even in my area, it's a whole
Okay.
site that's pretty much covered in
It's not wall to wall though, is it? Not allowed to be, is it, Brian?
it's a lot worse than what the one house is there with the big yard.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to be completely fair, you'd do the same thing you would do with multi-unit as you do to commercial, which is you charge the rate is based on the impervious surface coverage of the site.
Okay, thank you. Tyler?
Within this, do we provide discounts for the ratio to permeable and impermeable surfaces on the site? So, for example, if it's a 75-25% ratio of permeable surface to impermeable, is there a discount according to that?
So in a way, yes. Typically for a multi-unit site, if the site stays under 70% impervious site coverage, we don't require any on-site mitigation or storage because 70% is sort of the going coverage for a typical residential site. If they go over that, then we start to require those on-site stormwater tanks and so on. That's for a small site. So in a way, they'll get a benefit in terms of their rate by keeping their impervious surface generally low.
And if the ratio changed and flipped on its head, for example, you've got a drive, like Councillor Hansman was talking about before, you've got a driveway and a multi-unit section that's gone up with very minimal permeable surfaces, they will not receive a discount, correct?
So we wouldn't give a discount for sites having more permeable surfaces. We would only give a discount if a site actually did something to mitigate their stormwater by putting a rain tank or a treatment system.
There's your answer, fellas. Sweet, thank you.
Yep.
I think one of the questions that's being asked is, could we base it just on ISA?
For every house,
For the development?
I think that would be hard with most sections pay for their DCs at the point of subdivision. At that point, we don't know what's being built on those properties. That's why we use HUIs, and we say there will be swings and roundabouts naturally. We could, for multi-unit developments, provide an ISA adjustment every time. That's what we do currently, but that means that you will bake in some degree of stormwater under collection into your policy if you don't require that threshold of actual demand being half of assumed demand, requiring that threshold to be met. So you can do it, but...
Andre?
Thank you. You was able to talk a bit more about those discounts and apartment buildings.
So if you had so in terms of that threshold being met, if you had an apartment building and it was, say, 1,000 square metres of the site, and then you built 10 houses on it, the policy is going to assume that there are 3,600 square metres of ISA. So that's more ISA than is actually capable of being built on that site. And therefore you've met that threshold of actual demand being half of assumed demand, and so therefore you would get a reduction based on the actual impervious surface area of the site. So apartment buildings is a great example of a site that would receive this kind of discount.
Okay, good, thank you.
Excellent. Carry on, please.
So the next issue that we've looked at is remissions. So the current policy provides for the council to grant a remission in unique and compelling circumstances. The original intent of this clause was to allow the council to address a matter directly associated with a development contribution charge. The remission provision was initially removed in the drafting of this policy and replaced with a statement that we do not provide remissions. The council could still have opted to make a decision inconsistent with its policy under Section 80 of the LGA. An alternative remission provision was drafted and included in the consultation material. The alternative clause clarified that it's the development itself and not the developer or the future occupier of the site that must be unique, and the development must be sufficiently distinct from other developments that remitting a DC charge would not create a new precedent. Just a couple of points on the submissions we received. The term remission is used differently by different councils in their DC policies. Our council uses the term remission to refer to the council intervening on a DC charge where there is something about the development that means the assessment and the development do not match. And therefore the council considers it necessary to remit the DC charge. However, many councils use the term remission to refer to an actual demand assessment. So this is where demand is materially different to what's built into the policy. And this is what we call a special assessment. We don't have any proposal to remove special assessments from the policy, provided that that threshold is met. The confusion among people in the development sector who use this policy indicates there could be some value in renaming special assessments actual demand remissions to better align with other councils' development contribution policies if the council wishes to do so. We did also have a couple of people who confused rebates and remissions. Rebate sits outside the policy under our DC rebate policy, and we'll be talking about rebates later this afternoon. But noting the feedback that we received on remissions more generally, we do suggest the council adopt the alternative remission provision clause, and we've included that in your table in red. So that would allow you to remit DCs if a development presented itself that hadn't been considered by the policy and the assessment didn't match the development.
Righto. Hey, this is good. You're letting us have time all the way through to ask you questions. Any questions on this bit?
I mean, we might need to go into PX, I guess.
Okay, if we do. So we'll get to the end and then we might rip into PX because it's the end of the day. And if we've got any questions we need to talk about, we'll do that then. Is that right?
The one question which I think you could address publicly is the one that I sent beforehand, which was around the use of development agreements. I don't understand the process that we use as a council to do development agreements with developers versus the remissions and the rebates.
So the policy allows the council to enter, I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing, but the policy allows the council to enter into development agreements in certain circumstances, but I think that's different to what you might be talking about here.
Also, the question is like, developers will come and argue, oh, we should have a remission because we're a special circumstance and we're going to do X, Y, Z and, whatever circumstance. But if we have an ability to actually do a development agreement that would look at not charging the full DCs, but would get other benefits that we want as a city, I was always under the impression we had the ability to do that. So the developer might provide something else that is more beneficial to that local community or to us as a city than just the generic DC contribution. But I've never really understood what the process is around us considering that versus, say, just coming straight to council saying, give us a remission because X, Y, Z.
Would it be easier to deal with this as part of the rebate section and then maybe we go into PEC? Would that be easier to talk about this maybe?
I think it would be easier to deal with all of it in PX because it's crossing over into...
We're flipping around.
Yeah.
Okay. Carry on.
Okay. And then the final of the issues that we'll deal with individually, and then we'll do a couple of smaller issues, is the life of existing demand credits. So existing demand credits provide an efficient way for the council to fairly treat developers and ratepayers when allocating the cost of infrastructure to service growth. The council's policy has been to limit the life of existing demand credits to 10 years, and this provides a balance between being fair to developers and recognising that previous development has occurred on a site before and giving them time to redevelop, and also being fair to ratepayers and that a liability to provide capacity to service that site isn't in place forever. The current 10-year life of credits has been in the policy since 2007, and then prior to that, credits had a life of 5 years. We received 10 submissions on this issue. 8 submitters asked that the life of credits be extended to either 20 years or indefinitely, and 2 submitters supported the retention of the current provision, and that split is alongside developer, non-developer sector lines. If the council is only looking to address a specific issue related to the central city, we think a rebate is a better way to deal with this, because we think the rationale to limit the life of credits more generally is sound. And so after this workshop, we have a rebate briefing to deal with the extending the life of existing demand credits in the central city.
Kel.
I'm just curious as to how you came to that decision to leave it as it in existing 10 years when other councils around the country have extended their time, but we've had an earthquake which has substantially interfered with ongoing development.
So different councils across New Zealand have a range of ways in which they deal with existing demand credits. So some councils don't provide credits at all. Some councils provide a credit for a year after the site last exerts demand on infrastructure, all the way through to providing perpetual life of credits. And the way that we've always looked at it is when we retain capacity in the network for infrastructure, for growth that had, for development that had occurred in the past, that's not an efficient use of infrastructure capacity. And so we've always considered that 10 years is more generally is a fair way of dealing with that and striking a balance between developers and ratepayers. So in terms of the central city, we think it would be better dealt with as a rebate scheme, because this is quite a specific issue. And if you were to extend the life of existing demand credits, you can't really walk it back later. That has to become your policy going forward. So if there's certain sites, then we think a rebate's better to deal with it that way.
Still plenty.
So just to follow up, so you'd when you say you'd deal with it through a rebate, how would that work?
So we've got a briefing on rebates coming up after this, and we can explain. I'll talk through how I think is best to approach this.
Okay.
Right.
Carol.
I'll move through the next slides fairly quickly. These are some minor issues that submitters talk to us about. So just a note on non-residential HUE equivalences. This is where it gets a little bit technical, but these are how we convert non-residential demand into HUEs to assess for development contributions. The retirement sector asked for a couple of changes to be made to the policy. The first is to the reserve activity, so this is parks. They asked us to assess residential units at 0.1 of a HUE, and this is what is in our current policy. We had proposed to move to 0.25 and comparing where other councils across the country were with assessing for retirement village units. But we've considered their feedback and their observations about how residents use their park spaces. We think their feedback is fair, and we think that therefore that we could keep this charge at 0.1 of a HUE. Ultimately, it's a fairly minor change in terms of the overall DC assessment for retirement villages. We did receive a couple of requests to change the HUE equivalences for water supply and wastewater at retirement villages. Our rates are based on actual demand data and the advice of our water engineers, and these are considered fair and appropriate. We also note that our rates for care suites also include things like laundry facilities and cooking, and so we don't recommend dropping these charges beyond what's in the current policy. We did also receive a request to clarify that retirement village community facilities are not assessed for development contributions. Our assessment team already do this, but it's not clear in the policy, so we think it could be worth clarifying that. And then we also received a request that care suites are not charged for community infrastructure, so that's things like libraries, pools, and this was a drafting omission, so Table 4 should be amended to reflect that. We did receive a couple of requests to changes to definitions. The retirement sector asked us to split out aged care rooms and residential units. Residential care rooms, For our purposes, we don't think that's necessary in order to assess for demand. We received comments from, with respect to some of our new definitions in the policy for non-residential demand. These are aligned with our business growth model, and so we don't recommend making changes to these. The draft policy also proposed that an assessment fee will be invoiced alongside the development contribution requirement. The actual fee was included in the draft fees and charges in the annual plan, and it's $100 per development. So we received feedback from 7 submitters who were opposed to it, although several seemed to be mistaking the fee with actual development contribution charges. And then 6 were generally supportive of the proposal. We're recommending you retain this charge. It's a one-off flat fee charged per development. It does not matter how many times a developer interacts with the DC team or if the assessment is revised. We also don't agree with developers who said that a assessment fee would be a barrier to development. And then we made a couple of small changes to our catchments. So the first was to active travel, just a couple of small tweaks. Active travel, we added Templeton, we added a small section in Horswell and in Herwood, and so all those sections are considered serviced by the active travel activity. We also had a submission that Littleton should be excluded, but active travel also includes footpaths, not just cycleways, and so we think it's appropriate that Littleton is charged for the active travel activity. And then public transport, we included a small section on Marshland Road just up from Preston's Road that was initially omitted from the catchment. And that's it in terms of changes that we made to the catchment boundaries. These are very, very small changes. They will result in a very small change to the development contribution charge. Those final charges will be confirmed in June. It takes a little bit of time to rerun the model, so we don't have these for you today.
Yeah. Yanni? Oh, sorry, Andre, then Yanni.
Thank you. So active travel DC has been getting collected for some time, but if there's been a $0 budget for new footpaths, does that just mean that all active travel DC has been going towards cycle lanes and not footpaths?
So active travel is cycleways and footpaths.
But the council had a $0 footpath until the last LTP. So so of all the active travel DCs have been getting paid thus far, I'm trying to figure out where they've gone because they haven't gone to footpaths if there's a $0 budget for footpaths.
It'll be
for new
whatever
footpaths.
capital projects are in the LTP.
Okay.
If
So,
the footpaths weren't in the LTP, then they won't be collecting.
yeah. So that just means that up until now, all active travel DCs have gone to cycle paths and not footpaths, effectively.
There may have been other footpath projects
Yeah.
that had a small component of growth
Yeah.
in them, and you
Gotcha.
would have got those as well.
Cool, thank you. But in terms of the other areas of Halswell that this is extending to, around active travel and public transport, it's extended to areas with no footpaths and no public transport nearby. So,
But are considered part of the serviced catchment. So our transport planners looked at these catchments and considered that what is in these maps is reflective of the of what is considered serviced in the district.
yeah. So what's considered serviced catchment?
I might get a transport engineer up here to explain.
Because for someone who's, a number of kilometres away from the nearest bus route or footpath, they would...
So I'll need a transport.
No, by all means.
Yeah. Do we want to come back on that question?
Okay.
Yeah, just come over. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yanni, then Tyrone.
Yeah. So I presume there's a list of the projects that we're funding through active travel. Like it's.
Yep.
Do we know how much of that is Kiwi Rail? Can we find out?
It's only infrastructure that our council delivers. So it's the growth component of infrastructure that the council has to pay for. We
Okay.
exclude any third-party funding from
Yeah.
what's charged in development contributions.
Right, but we're Kiwi Rail's forcing us to do it and pay for it. So I presume we're hopefully collecting DCs for that as well, because a lot of that stuff is going into growth areas where there's increased people, cyclists, etc. So if we could find out, that would be cool.
We can find out
Yeah.
and come back to you.
I'm just looking at Martians Road. I'm like, do people not cycle up Martians Road? Like, why has active travel got those exclusions up Martians Road? It seems an area that I know there's going to be heaps of development there.
I'm not sure. I didn't draw these catchments.
Okay.
I don't know if we've got anyone
Right.
here
So
who can answer it. We might need to take
okay.
these questions offline.
That would be cool. I know there's massive development going on up there, and there's a real concern that council again is going to foot the bill for massive amounts of infrastructure to make it safer for people to cross, safer for people to cycle, safer for people to drive or get the bus. So it'd just be really good to understand a little bit more about that.
We can provide some information on why those catchments have been drawn the way they were.
Yeah, no, that just the industrial stuff. I sorry, I don't understand. The request to change the definition. What's behind that?
So, as part of this review, we moved how we assess for non-residential demand from zoning to land use, and then we added a whole bunch of definitions for all of the land use types. Right. But we needed to make sure the definitions matched what's in the growth model that underpins the policy to make sure that the charges reflect that we're actually accurately charging developers per their development type.
Okay.
So the definitions that are in the policy match what's in the growth model. That's
So, for
where they came
example,
from.
where we've got like 10,000 extra heavy vehicle movements happening, do we charge DCs now more than what we were doing in the past to make sure that, you know, something goes back to addressing the impact? I'm just thinking of like inland ports, for example, that. Yeah.
In the last iteration of the growth model, the business growth model, we changed. So when we used to look at industrial, it included warehousing. And in the last iteration of the business growth model, we have split those two out, acknowledging that industrial and warehousing are often now quite different activities. So warehousing, for example, is likely to have more truck movements probably than a standard industrial operation somewhere in the city. So we're looking at those two as separate activities now, and it means that the DC team can look at them separately as well.
So the DCs that we would charge are going to be based on the impact of the activity on the environment.
So we've tried to improve the activities in the growth models so that we can reflect that right through the process as well.
Yeah, and for non-warehousing, like outdoor storage, is anything?
Outdoor storage is a little bit different and is usually associated with industrial activities. So where they're, say, creating something on site and then storing it, those will be linked together. Warehousing is very much around the storing and distribution as opposed to the creating and storing to then be used.
Yeah. I'd probably like a little bit more information on this one, if possible.
Yeah, the other reason we've split it out in the growth models is that if you think about an industrial activity, so manufacturing, for example, versus warehousing, manufacturing would have more people in the development working there, whereas warehousing, it's probably lower employees but more space. So the two are actually quite different in terms of how we're looking at them now.
Okay, thank you. Tyrone, please.
Yeah. Just on the public, did we have the public transport amended catchment boundaries up there?
There you go.
That one, yeah.
Which one? Sorry, public.
Thank you. So that doesn't, from what I can tell, capture Governor's Bay.
No, so it's not part of the bus network. Is that right? Yep.
Yeah.
So it's not serviced.
So with the other council, the regional council, there's quite a bit of advocacy going on there to try and include Governor's Bay on the bus network. So I'm just wondering just what the impact of this would have for that. Yeah, I mean, it's not currently on the bus network, but it could be, potentially.
If the bus network were
Just
to
wondering,
change,
it's a bit chicken and egg, and I'm just wondering, you know, if it's, yeah, not that I'm looking for my residents to have to pay any money or anything, but I'm just trying to think ahead of the curve.
Can we update this annually, Alan?
So, do you guys have a? Do you want to come up and
It's a
explain?
case of, at the moment, that area is not serviced.
Yeah.
So if we were to be charging development contributions to people in that area, you're charging them for demand that they are not generating.
But if he decided to extend the
It would be a case of updating the policy
right,
if and when ECAN did extend services to that area, and we then had projects to provide infrastructure to support those services.
right, okay, cool. Okay, no, that's cool. Yep, thank you.
Alan, do you just want to clarify, it's proposed to be updated every year, the schedule of...
Just the schedule of assets, not the rest of the policy. This is quite an involved process. The schedule of assets we could update as part of the annual plan or LTP process, but it's just literally the assets that we collect for, not the catchment maps.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I'm sort of kind of shooting myself in the foot a little bit here, but I just want to make sure that unintentionally we don't stymie the potential of the ability for the bus network to be extended to Governor's Bay, I guess, is probably what I'm thinking.
Okay. Aaron, please, you got your hand up.
Yes, I have. So going back to Andre's footpaths and stuff, what seems to be an issue is if we are collecting the DCs for footpaths, when a subdivision's built, the footpaths are all done by the developer. The DCs, is it correct, are there, when it comes to footpaths, to connect up where a traditional suburb might finish and their new one has started? Is that correct?
I'm not.
So I think the new footpaths program is about connecting up some of those subdivisions. So you're right, Councillor Cowan, that within a subdivision and along the frontage of a new subdivision, the developer pays for all those footpaths.
Yeah.
It's just the connecting footpaths.
And normally the curb and channel, but what's normally happens, Aaron, the gap in the middle normally gets developed sooner or later, and it all sorts falls into place. But sometimes there are places that, like Gardeners Road, there's a gap there that a yawring gap.
Yeah, and that's the one I was about to raise. Nice mind reading there, Phil. So we've had hundreds of houses built in this area recently, paying DCs and then paying huge rates after the DCs. And we've got a gap that the community board put on Gardeners Road to have that gap filled. Well, RAF was there, so what are we, at least 6 years ago. But works haven't started. So far we've got none of it. When does the money get spent and how does it get prioritised? Because there's obvious need there. It's a 60 km/h road, kids walk to school, foggy mornings, right on the edge of the white line because it's long grass.
The footpath thing's coming to us, isn't it?
Not sure. So in that case, there would have to be a project for the footpath to collect DCs for that footpath.
Yes, I'm not sure what's in the schedule of assets that would deal with that currently. Do you guys? No. Sorry.
Right.
Just.
Okay, because it's really hard to explain to people in that area that go around the big blocks, why they've paid DCs, that some of it goes towards footpaths or roads, but they're not connected up.
Well, one thing we could do, Aaron, and I know it happens on some blocks where the council actually pays for a sewer pipe to be larger than what the subdivider wants because the council knows that something's going to happen. I can't see any reason why we can't build the footpath and or the curb and channel with money and then put it onto a little account that when the developer does come along and do it, the work's already done, but we charge them for the work that they would have had to do that we had done previously. See where I come from? Yeah,
absolutely. Although we've collected hundreds of DCs in this area and that footpath's not been done. And I got a quote for it 6 years ago and it was 170,000 back then.
Okay, no worries. Marcus.
Thank you. Just looking at the public transport amended catchment boundaries there, I'm interested to see that Templeton's not included, even though it is serviced by ECAN buses currently.
I'm assuming it's not part of the serviced catchment, but I need a transport engineer to.
We will have to come back.
Okay. We'll provide a memo explaining the active travel and public transport catchments in due course.
Cool. Thank you.
Alrighty. Carry on, please.
Okay. So just a couple of things we did want to touch on briefly. So we do recognise that the charges have increased between the 2021 and 2025 policy, but just to note, it's important to see where they sit in the context more in the context of DCs more generally. So this graph on your screen, we have the 2025 charges in orange, the 2021 charges in purple, and then the 2016 charges are in green. So what you'll see is that the DC charges are very much a return to normal, and they're more in line with where the charges were back in 2016. And you've already heard from Amy today, but we have had some pretty big swings in our population and growth projections as a result of the earthquakes. Our 2021 model was based on rapid growth projections, and we have returned to a more normal level of growth. So more normal level of growth, more normal level of DCs. And just to remind you that we've had a fairly significant increase in the cost to deliver the growth component of our infrastructure, almost $200 million between 2021 and 2024, combined with a slower rate of growth, means that the cost of growth is being spread across fewer households, which has increased the development contribution charges. And you've already seen these slides before in previous briefings. So this is how we compare to our Metro Council peers and to our Greater Christchurch townships. So really we are not out of alignment with other councils with our draft charges. So in terms of next steps, based on direction today, we will draft the required policy changes. If you have any additional amendments you would like to see to the policy, could you please provide those to Sam by the 30th of May, and we will provide advice on those requested amendments. If required, we'll provide a final briefing on those amendment advice, and the final policy will provide a briefing in June. We do understand this is quite a technical policy, and that you may have some additional questions, or you may wish to have a one-on-one conversation with staff. So we will make ourselves available for a drop-in session if you would like to have a chat with us about this policy, because we do want you to understand what's in it. And then we will bring a final policy to you on the 24th of June for adoption. And then we're also doing some work on rebates, which will be progressed as a separate report, and we do have a briefing for you just after this. Any questions?
Great. That's fantastic presentation, Alan. Well done. So we've got one from Andre and then Vic, and then we'll probably go into PX to talk about. Oh, we still got more? That's the end of it.
It's about the rebates next. Yeah.
Okay, Andre.
Thank you. Out of curiosity, are councils sort of bound by legislation as to how high they can set DCs? Like if there's a council in a rural area, for example, and they really don't want to allow development somewhere, but the government makes them, can the council then turn around and up DCs?
So you don't have to charge DCs. We have to have a DC policy.
Yeah.
So you could have a DC policy that says we don't charge DCs and we recover the entire cost of growth from rates.
Yeah.
But legislation dictates how we set the charges. So it's cost of growth divided by growth, and then accounting for interest and inflation as part of that.
So if hypothetically there's a sort of rural council area and they really don't want to allow development in a certain area, the government makes them, can the council then turn around and just set DCs so high? Are the sky's the limit, or are they?
So in terms of what's sped out by that charge, it could be, I mean, Auckland, their DCs they go up to 140,000 and don't include water supply and wastewater.
Crikey. Yeah.
So, DCs can be much higher than what is in our current policy, but what is in our policy is the cost of growth.
Yeah.
And you can't set a charge beyond what is generated by that calculation.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to swing back into the census data. So am I correct that you have overlaid the census data and the results across your work so far? And you've referenced it a couple of times in your narrative today, but we haven't yet had a briefing or a report on that?
Yes. Monitoring and Research will provide additional information on the census in the coming months. I don't know if there's a...
Look, can I just, why I'm raising it is I feel as if I've got one hand behind my back on this. It would be really helpful to have had that information to us beforehand so that we can actually, because this is really technical.
The last of our census order. So when the census comes out, the Stats NZ release a certain amount of information, but it's usually not enough to meet our needs. So we put in what is called a customised order, and the last of that only arrived a few weeks ago. So Alan's had it very hot off the press, and we are working at the moment on coming back to you with a bit of a briefing around the census data and what's in there, and most interesting pieces really.
So when you come and present to us on the census data, can you swing back, please, and connect back to this as and where you can, so that we can try and see it all together?
Yep. So, I mean, we can provide you with that data, but we order hundreds almost of tables from Stats NZ, so it's just rationalising it down and getting it to you in a way that's consumable.
Yeah, I'm happy to wait for the briefing on it, but I'm pleased you acknowledged it was technical, because I'm finding this hard going, to be fair.
Alan, I've got one question. If you go back to the bar graph with the green and that one, I look at it and go, how daft were we by lowering it down to where the purple one is? We haven't done ourselves any favours, because why everyone's getting all excited as it's gone from not a lot to a hell of a lot, as if we'd kept it, sadly, at say, take that first one for Central City, if we'd kept it at 20 grand when people were happy with it, we wouldn't be going from 10 to 30, but that's in the past. Could you, and I look at it as being a toilet's a toilet no matter where it is, sort of, and I know that's generalising the whole thing. Just could you come back and just tell us, if we made every one of just average them all, where would the number be?
So the LGA doesn't allow us to set flat charges across the district. If we did have an average charge with this policy, it might be like 35-ish, maybe. We do have levies coming in 2027, and what we're hearing from the government is that we won't draw catchments anymore. It'll be a flat charge across the urban area. So we will be most likely, given what they've told us so far, getting flat charges going forward. So we won't see variations across the city from 2027.
So right at the moment, we can't do that.
Can't do it at the moment.
Okay,
the
good
LGA
answer.
doesn't allow us to set district-wide charges for all activities.
Andre?
Sorry, what activities doesn't it allow you to set them for?
So
District-wide.
it discourages the use of district-wide catchments unless you have a reason to do so. So we charge things like sports parks and community infrastructure district-wide on the basis that everyone benefits from a sports park regardless of where you live. But we can't say the same for like neighbourhood parks, for example, where you visit a local park but you maybe wouldn't drive across town to use that park. So we do have to apportion some degree of benefit, and that's how we do catchments.
Okay.
Thank you.
And here am I getting all excited, said we were going into PX, but you've got one more lot to show us, haven't you?
Yes. So I'll do rebates next.
Yep.
Cool. Right, so we had a briefing with you on the 6th of May on DC rebates. Just to remind you, the Council's DC rebate policy sits outside of the development contribution policy and enables the Council to promote its strategic objectives by establishing rebate schemes for strategically desirable development types. A rebate is in effect the waiving of DCs rather than Council handing over any cash. Development contributions are revenue that the Council agrees to forego and therefore are rate funded. So at our briefing on the 6th of May, you indicated an interest for 2 rebate schemes, one for existing demand credits in the Central City and one for multi-storey residential development in the Central City. So we've drafted some suggested criteria for both of these schemes, and these were circulated to you last week, and we need some feedback from you on some of the issues. So the first one we'll deal with is the value of expired credits in the Central City. So what we're suggesting is that you have a rebate for any development within the 4 avenues. The rebate is for existing demand credits on a development site, based on the previous use of the site as at the 3rd of September 2010. So essentially, development sites that haven't been redeveloped in the central city will get the credits that were sitting on the site before the first earthquake. We are suggesting that the scheme expire at this stage on the 30th of June 2027. This will align with the introduction of development levies. It also gives us an opportunity to evaluate the effectiveness of the scheme, and you can always extend the scheme later. But one thing we do need your feedback on is when you want the rebate scheme eligibility to start. So to be eligible for a rebate, a developer needs to submit a complete consent to the council. Normally we would make eligibility from the date the scheme is adopted. And there was a question at the last briefing about how you would include other sites. And if you wanted the scheme to include sites that already had their consents in, you would need to backdate it to the start, to a date that predates the consent being submitted to the council. And then in terms of the last set of criteria for this rebate scheme, we also need you to tell us how much revenue you would like to forego to progress the scheme. And then also there was another question asked about whether any rebates had to come to finance and performance or whether staff could deal with them. Currently, there is no delegation to staff over $1 million for rebate schemes. And so you could either decide that rebates in excess of $1 million will be considered by finance and performance, or you could provide a delegation to staff to approve those rebates. So, keen for some feedback. So that's the criteria for the scheme, so we thought maybe we could stop here for now.
Cool. Can we track back to the 4AV slide? Yeah. So there are locations that would be of central city benefit on the other side of Dean's Ave, for example, like the sales yards. I'm wondering if there may be able to be exemptions just outside of that border, of that boundary, because it's a one road split essentially. We made a wonky street anyway. But
we've always used the criteria that it's on the central city side of the 4AVs. It makes it easy for the development contribution assessment team to administer the rebate. You still start getting into arguments if you start making the scheme broader than the distinct boundaries of the 4 avenues, and so that's why we've set it that way. We could consider something else if you wanted to, but that is administratively easy to deal with.
Okay, so
you've got to be hard and fast, because that's not just it. You imagine thinking about going right around the city on the other side of the road. There's a Aladdin's cave of stuff you'd open up there you wouldn't want to know about.
I'm trying to think of locations of special interest, such as the sales yards, for example, which the last consent was applied for in the hundreds of rooms, and it was an interface of commercial and residential development, which included a hotel, which they believed would influence attendance to Paere Kia Ore, which was declined by council. That's not happening now, but it's something that could be an exemption potentially, and I probably wouldn't want to get all the 4 AVs included, but with something around that vicinity, is there any way to get into that for developments like that?
You then sort of get into an issue of picking and choosing developments. If you start identifying other sites outside of the 4 AVs, you probably need to draw some kind of boundaries, which might make that a little bit harder to be targeted in terms of rebate schemes. The other thing that is that you could potentially do is a remission request if there was something that made it unique and compelling as well. That's the other avenue through the policy.
That's great, thanks.
Kel?
Thanks, Ellen. So I just want to understand that bottom box, the extent of the rebate. So a building that was destroyed in the earthquake, let's just say for argument's sake, the day after the 3rd, which is the 4th, the first earthquake. So the assessment for the demand credits would be based on that building's use of infrastructure and demand credits from the day before the earthquake.
Yep.
And so it would apply 10 years from there,
So,
which is 2000.
so the policy, we still have to use the DC policy that's in place at the time a complete consent application is received,
Yeah.
which limits the life of credits to 10 years. And then essentially what this rebate would do is to say, despite that,
Yeah.
you get the credits that were sitting on the site as at the 3rd of September 2010. So that's essentially how it would work. So the credits that were sitting on that site on that day.
Okay, yeah. So if they, the building is destroyed and then they start to build it in 2026, that's outside that period, right? Because it's outside the 10 years. That's what you're saying?
You say 2026?
Yeah, like next year.
So if they got a consent in next year and you had a rebate scheme, they would get, their credits would naturally have expired under the policy, but then they'd have a rebate scheme to get the value of their credits back.
Okay.
And so that would be applied to the assessment.
Okay. So it's not time bound. Oh, yeah. Sorry? Yeah.
Thank you, Kel. Yeah, it's tight. It's strange. Okay, that must be just
So
about it.
we do need some feedback. Do you want this rebate scheme to start the date that it's adopted? Or do you want to backdate it to include consents that already have been submitted?
We need to make that. Yeah.
I think maybe that discussion on PX.
Okay, cool.
That's exactly where I was heading.
All right. So the other one we've got is Central City Residential. So this is another one that you expressed an interest in. So for this one, we're suggesting any residential development within the 4 avenues. The suggestion is that the rebate is for residential development that comprises at least 6 stories, or the residential component of a mixed-use development where the residential component is at least 6 stories. We did have a question about parking and storage issues in the CBD relating to residential development. Most of this is outside the scope of the policy. The draft criteria currently excludes any levels used for parking or garaging, but you could take that out and allow a developer to use a parking or storage level as one of the 6 residential stories. But just to note that one potential issue you could have with this is if you've got a mixed use development, there's no way to tell if that parking is associated with the residential component or with the commercial component. Because this residential development is about getting more people living in the central city, the rebate excludes property used for any purpose other than residential, including the use of property for short-term accommodation. And we recommend a covenant is required to ensure this happens. We're suggesting the rebate is for 100% of the development contribution requirement, although you can set it to be wherever you want it to be. And then again, to be eligible, a developer needs to submit a complete consent application to the council, and normally we would make eligibility from the date the scheme is adopted. Again, you need to decide if any rebates over $1 million will be considered by finance and performance, or whether you want to give a delegation to staff. We also need you to tell us how much revenue you would like to forego to progress this scheme. And again, we're suggesting the scheme expire on the 30th of June 2027, again to align with levies. It also gives us an opportunity to review the scheme, and we can always extend it. Do you want to take any questions before we go into PX?
Okay.
Nope.
We'll go to PX now.
All done? Oh, sorry, we've got 2 questions. We've got Vic and Andre.
Can I just go back to the rebate scheme will expire on 30 June 27? What have I missed? Where's that date come from?
So that's the date the levies are coming in at this stage. So what we've heard from the government is that they think growth needs to pay for growth, and rebates are not growth pays for growth. Rebates are ratepayers subsidise growth. So what we're suggesting is we set it at the 30th of June 2027 at this stage, and then we see what the levy legislation looks like, we see what the policy looks like, and then we can have another look at these schemes in the context of what we know the legislation is going to be.
Thank you. And then the second question was, you've referred to at least 6 stories. Can you just walk me through how you landed on 6?
So that came up that was suggested in conversations in the rebate briefing last time, 6 stories. We heard that you felt that 2 to 3 stories was not efficient use of land in the central city. The other thing we've heard from some of the planners is that they're getting a hard time to developers to build up. And so this is the sort of scheme that we're trying to incentivise intensification in the central city.
Personally, I like the idea of being able to use the parking or garaging as one of the levels, just for what it's worth.
Yep, Andre.
Yeah, well, my feedback is that it's a brilliant policy idea. I mean, there's very few of this type of development being built currently. It's the kind of thing we're wanting to encourage. So I can't see us foregoing too much revenue anytime soon, but if we do, that would be very, very good news because we're about to get a whole lot more ratepayers. But yes, same views on parking. It's like getting into the specifics on it. Possibly not worth our while. More on-site parking would be a good thing. Rooftop terrace also sounds rather fabulous. So, fine as is without too many weeds and specifics, in my view.
Yep, thank you. Yanni and then Aaron and then PX.
So my understanding from the work that we've done previously and understanding the typology is that it's the cost of building up, regardless of DCs, that influences it.
What we've heard from the planners is that it's an expensive development type, and so that's what they're hearing from developers is a barrier to creating this kind of development. Development contributions is ultimately a really small component of the total cost to build high-rise residential. So as an example, if DCs are $30,000 in the central city and you built 20 units and they were all charged one Huey, you're looking at $600,000 of DCs. So a fairly small component of the overall cost.
Yeah. So do we have, like, in the East Frame, for example, would we have information about the higher storied developments and how much DCs they've paid? Yeah, Williams Cook are building a number of them. What are they, like 4 or 5 story? But you're not like, we're not getting them built. So I'm just wondering if we're just, I guess I'm just trying to understand how impactful this would actually be. And then again, the other concern was that we'll just be subsidising Airbnbs.
So we are recommending a covenant to prevent these from being used as Airbnbs to encourage residential development and getting more people living in the central city. Yeah. Whether developers take it up or not, or they want to keep clear titles, that's up to them.
Right. And what about mixed use?
So we're suggesting that this could apply to mixed use as well, provided that there are at least 6 stories of residential. So you could have a commercial level on the bottom and then 6 stories of residential, and those 6 stories would receive the rebate.
Okay, thank you, Yanni. Aaron, please.
Yeah, just the same point as Andre made, and that yes, the 6 stories, yes to including the parking. And hopefully, like Andre said, we will be going down this road having to do the rebate scheme because it means we're getting what we want. Cheers.
Okay, so we'll fire into PX. Do you want to do it there? Okay. Yeah.
Just if that's not impactful and doesn't get any more 6 stories built, then it won't cost us a cent and we're not subsidising anything because nothing extra has gotten built. So I'm at a total loss as to the point you made.
Okay, so we'll fire into PX and then we can ask any pointed questions that we want to. Thank you very much.